Hello, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the live presentation today, you can type them into the Q&A located on the bottom toolbar of the Zoom screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and those registered for Crop Talk will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 27th edition of Crop Talk. And this week we have a few things going on. We getting to that time of year where we're hate to say it, but we're getting to start planning for 2026 crop, and we're just nicely getting 2025 in the bin. So, but I thought it'd be a good time as we start thinking about 26 to start talking about winter wheat for those of us that are growing winter wheat or planning to grow winter wheat or even thinking about growing winter wheat to maybe get a bit of an update as to some of the things that have been going on in the winter wheat. A lot of things changing. There's a lot of new varieties. There's some new practices that are going on. So I just thought it'd be a good opportunity to get Alex Griffith to come on. And Alex works with Ducks Unlimited, but he has been working quite a bit with winter wheat over the last few years. So kind of one of the guys that lives with winter wheat. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity for him to come on today and give us a little bit of an update. After that, we're going to go into the crop scouting panel and then a crop update. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Alex, and let's start with some winter wheat information.
Perfect. Thank you very much there, Lionel. Just let me know when you can see that and if everything's looking good on your end.
Yeah, looks good, Alex.
Perfect. Alrighty, so like Lionel said, I'm Alex Griffiths with Ducks Unlimited, and a big part of my job is running a winter wheat program, actually, where I do a little bit of, I guess, landowner programming, but we also do some research at the diversification center, so I'm kind of in and around the crop throughout the majority of the year. So getting into planning for this upcoming year's crop, today I'm going to talk about kind of how 2025 went and where acreage is at for winter wheat and fall rye. Then I'm going to get into variety selection. As Lionel mentioned, there's many new varieties coming out, and some of them are pretty exciting. And then everything you need to know for seeding info, some new production practices, and fertility. So starting off this year, there was 174,000 acres of fall rye and just shy of 40,000 acres of winter wheat that was seeded in the fall of 2024. This was the most fall rye acres ever seeded in Manitoba, whereas for winter wheat, that was actually 600,000 acres seeded back in 2013 and 2008. So there was a lot of winter cereal fields in Manitoba this past year, but only about 1 in 5 fields would have been winter wheat. If I had to give my best guess, I would expect to be seeing a modest increase of winter wheat acres coming this fall, and likely a decrease in the rye acres as the prices aren't crazy exciting, and there will likely be some carryover with all that production. So going way back to the beginning of May, it was a pretty decent year for winter survival, actually. Stats Canada shows both your seeded acreage and then the acres remaining after winter kill. And in the last 5 years, winter wheat has averaged about 79 or 80% survival. And this past year, it was 87, almost rounding up to 88% survival. So that was pretty solid. Most of the fields that I scout are in southwestern Manitoba, kind of around Melita to Balder up to Roblin. And for the most part, I saw very localized winter kill this year. There was only a handful of fields that were reseeded that I knew of, and all of them were in the southern part of the province. Once you got a little closer to the US border, and there was likely a warm spell that happened in late February that melted the insulating snow layer before it got cold again, which kind of froze the crowns. The field that's on the screen here is an example of one of those winter killed fields, as it was seeded in late September into a fallow, and it's a very hilly field. So you can see on the field edges and the lower spots where the snow had accumulated, and the winter wheat survived there. But once the snow had blown off the rest of the field, it was bare and winter killed. And seeing the large cracks in the soil is kind of a telltale sign of potential winter kill as well, since those cold temperatures are penetrating deeper into the ground, making it colder at the ground level. But for the most part, most fields looked like this one did coming out of winter. The field on the left was the variety Vortex seeded on two-row barley stubble, while the field on the right was Cold Front seeded on canola stubble. Both fields were seeded in early September and had a big healthy crown to regrow from, and then they also had nice tall stubble to help catch the snow and insulate the plants. And then here's an example of a fallow field, which does not have any stubble for snow catch, but it still turned out to be a really good field. And the biggest reason for that is because it was sown so early that it had these very large, massive crowns to regrow from. As you can see in the picture on the left, it was, well, the crown was about the size of my thumb, basically. And once the leaves start growing in that like prostate way or prostrate form, that's actually a really good sign of winter hardiness. So briefly, I just wanted to mention how to assess winter survival. I usually use plants per square foot as the best way. Ideally, you want anywhere from 20 to 30 plants per square foot. But if you go down as low as about 13 plants per square foot, that's still over 90% of your expected yield, which is really impressive because that's losing over half of the plants that you seeded originally. The reason that this works out so well is because winter cereals have a great ability to tiller and fill in space, which is why those lower plant stands can still yield well. The photo on the right is from a bag test that I did, which is a great way to assess winter survival early. You take some plants, you clip the old leaves and the roots, and then you put that crown in a wet paper towel, on a wet paper towel, sorry, in a Ziploc bag filled with air. And after about 2 days, 2 to 3, sort of, the healthy crowns will regrow and new leaves and roots, while the winter killed crowns will look like that circled red one. But don't panic if you see some winter killed crowns like this, as the stand can tolerate some losses. And the field that I actually took this bag test from, it was last year, and the producer ended up having about a 90 bushel per acre average across the field, so it still did very well. This on the screen here is the winter crop survival model by Western Ag, and it's a very good gauge of winter survival by region. This was a screenshot of Melitta's from the year, right at Wato, actually. And it measures the soil temperature at the crown depth, which is around the 1 inch level. And that's the blue line that you can see on the right. And then the model also gives an expected cold hardiness, which is the black line. So as long as your blue line stays above your black line, no winter kill has happened. But when the blue line dips below it, that usually means that the snow has melted and the field is bare. And the plots at Melitta this year did have a little bit of winter kill, but overall it wasn't that severe, and they were able to recover and do all right. And there are multiple soil probes across the prairies from this site, and you can customize it to use hybrid rye or open pollinated rye, winter triticale, lots of different other winter crops, and even different varieties of those crops to see how their cold hardiness is affected. So after checking for winter kill, the year was actually kind of fairly average after that. It was a very dry spring, so there was some leaf disease, but not tons of it. And fusarium is always around, but I haven't heard of it being much worse than a regular year so far. The map on the right shows the fusarium head blight risk map that Paul Bullock and the University of Manitoba has developed. And this was a screenshot of June 22nd this year for the variety Cold Front, and it had a high risk of fusarium basically across the whole province. Fusarium likes high humidity and temperatures above 25 degrees Celsius, which started to happen around mid to late June. And because winter wheat flowers early, it can often escape the worst infection periods. As you can see, this field on the left was starting to flower already on June 18th, but I would still say most fields end up getting sprayed with a fungicide at head timing just as a standard practice nowadays. So overall, depending on where and when the rains fell, it's kind of been a mixed bag of yields that I've heard. I've heard anywhere from 60 to as high as over 100 bushels per acre, but many of the fields that had good rains or had good conditions are anywhere from about 85 to the mid 90s in bushels per acre. This year, I'd say water was definitely the most limiting resource, and a couple more timely rains would have really helped out many crops. Surprisingly, there's actually still a fair bit of winter cereal harvest that is not complete yet, as I've seen quite a few both winter wheat and fall rye fields still standing with the recent rains that we've been having delaying harvest. So moving out of 2025 and into preparing for 2026, what's really interesting is just how much variety preference in Manitoba has changed in just the last 3 years. This chart was taken from MASC's variety market share reports from 2021 and then again in 2024. And back in 2021, the varieties Emerson, Gateway, and Elevate made up 85% of Manitoba's total winter wheat acreage. Those varieties were all released in the early 2010s, and just 3 years later have dropped to now make up only about 20% of Manitoba's acreage. Meanwhile, varieties like Gold Rush, Vortex, and then especially Wildfire have really increased in popularity, with Wildfire being more than half of the total winter wheat acreage in the province now. I expect that we'll see a large increase in cold front and possibly overdrive as well now that those varieties have more readily available seed. I briefly mentioned winter hardiness, and personally, I think that that is the most important variety trait that you can have, as every other characteristic doesn't matter if the crop doesn't survive the winter. There has been a big focus on winter hardiness in plant breeding recently, as the top 5 varieties shown on this table are all a very good rating and were registered in the last 10 years. The difference between very good and good might not sound like much, but when you're faced with tough winter kill conditions, it can be the difference between reseeding or not. For an example of that, here is a demo field that Ducks had way back in 2021 now that compared Emerson and Wildfire under the same conditions. They were seeded the same day in early September on the same canola stubble with the same fertility on the same half section. And the Emerson was a complete winter kill, while the Wildfire ended up being a beautiful field in the end. So it makes a huge difference, especially if you get a low snow year. So looking at each variety, starting with Cold Front, which is making a good name for itself in the last couple of years as the new highest yielding variety with a 93 bushel per acre average in the McVet trials. It's a consistent 100 bushel per acre potential variety. On top of yield, it's also extremely well-rounded with very good winter hardiness, average protein, and it's resistant to all rusts. One potential knock on it would be that it's only rated intermediate for Fusarium head blight, while most of the other varieties are rated as moderately resistant. So if you get a wet year, it could be at a higher risk, but that can be managed by your head timing sprays. It's slightly shorter than Wildfire, and it has medium maturity, which might not seem like much, but being an inch or two shorter and 2 to 3 days earlier maturing can make a big difference with lodging and an early harvest. And I keep hearing lots of chatter about this one as it's a top yielder with very few drawbacks. I'd expect to see a lot more acres of it in the coming years, and I believe that there's pretty good seed supply in the province this year too. Next is Wildfire, which is very identifiable close to harvest with these bronze-colored wheat heads. Wildfire is currently around half of the winter wheat grown in Manitoba and is a great variety for the province. It's got a solid 89 bushel per acre average in those McVet trials and average protein, and it was previously the highest yielding winter wheat until Cold Front came along. It's rated very good for winter hardiness, and it is a bit taller, so it can be prone to lodging. It's also susceptible to stem rust, which has spores that overwinter in the southern states and are blown north with winds. Preventative fungicides can help with this, and due to the timing of infections, especially as far north as Manitoba, usually any infections happen after flowering where your yields are not as severely affected, which is good. This is also a later maturing variety, as I often see spring wheat will be harvested before it. But overall, it's been grown lots in the province in the last 5 to 6 years and is tried and true. Next variety would be Vortex, and it's fairly new and was bred to be a replacement to Emerson. And I call it a jack of all trades variety as it does most things well. It's about the same yield as Wildfire and has higher protein. It's got very good winter hardiness and is moderately resistant to Fusarium head blight. It's resistant to all rusts, has medium maturity, and is slightly shorter with good standability. Overall, this one's an excellent, consistent variety for Manitoba, and I hope to continue seeing more of it in the coming years. Overdrive is a newer variety, as last year nearly all fields of it were pedigree seed production. It's lower yielding than the other varieties mentioned so far, but I know in Lethbridge, where it was developed, it yielded as well as Wildfire did. So maybe with the right conditions, that can hopefully improve. It's got very good winter hardiness and is moderately resistant to fusarium. It's got an excellent disease resistance package, being resistant to all rusts and bunt, and even some resistance to the wheat curl mite. But the best part of this variety is that it's very short and has very early maturity. It's nearly a week earlier maturing than Wildfire, as this picture was taken last year on June 13th, and it had already started heading out. And lastly, I'll cover an old standard in Emerson, which has been around for nearly 15 years now. Emerson is resistant to Fusarium head blight, and there's no other wheat variety that can say that. So that's a huge positive and kind of the main selling feature of it. It has decent yields across the most site years of any variety in those McVet trials, and the best protein of any variety as well. It isn't as winter hardy as any of the other varieties discussed, but it is still rated good. It has medium maturity and is a little taller, being about as tall as Wildfire is. Personally, it's not my first choice for a variety, strictly because of the reduced winter survival, but if it makes it through the winter, it's pretty solid, and being resistant to Fusarium should keep it in Manitoba for years to come. So once you have a variety picked out, you need a harvested field to seed into. Ideally, a stubble should be something taller with good snow catchability that is harvested early enough to have time in the fall for your wheat to grow and be seeded in good time. So things like sunflowers and grain corn usually don't work. At the bottom left of these slides, I put MASC's relative stubble yield response, which shows the expected percentages of yield based off of what stubble you are seeding into. Canola is by far the most common, as about 2/3 of winter wheat fields are seeded into canola, and it has the highest percentage of yield response other than flax, but harvest timing for flax is often too late to be getting seeded into. But there is a trend for more straight cut varieties that are leaving canola crops out longer in the field, making it hard to seed into the field when you haven't harvested it yet. So I spend a lot of time discussing alternative stubbles to be seeding into. My personal next favorite stubble would be barley, specifically two-row barley, because it's harvested early and it has decent stubble height and a very good relative yield response. And two-row barley loses its germ much faster than a six-row barley does. So two-row barley doesn't really become a volunteer issue the following spring, but six-row has the potential to do that. I'd also lump in oats here because they're fairly similar to a barley stubble from what I've seen. They might be harvested a little bit later, but if it's off early, it can be a good option as well. Peas are the next one, and they're off very early, but basically have no stubble for snow catch. But from the fields that I've seen, they've actually had really good success in growing winter wheat and pea stubble, as they were seeded extremely early, and it could work very well, especially if you're further north in the province where you expect to get a bit higher snowfall. Some other stubbles like flax or soybeans or corn stubble are usually off too late, although in recent years I've had a couple of surprising ones where I saw a very good winter wheat field that was seeded into early harvested silage corn stubble, and I even saw a dry bean field that did pretty well too. Also, for any unseeded or fallow acres where you basically have zero stubble for snow catch, I would say the best management practices would kind of be the same for peas, where you seed a winter hardy variety as early as you can in late August or early September for the best chance of surviving the winter. Spring wheat is another option that I've been hearing more producers ask about lately, as it is off fairly early and does have a bit of stubble height. And I've actually seen a couple of fields of winter wheat on spring wheat stubbles in the last few years that did turn out all right. Based off of that MASC relative stubble yield response, it's about as good of an option as oats and even a better option than peas. But there is lots of things to be wary about if you do decide to go this way. The main one would be being extremely careful about wheat streak mosaic, as wheat streak is a viral disease of wheat that is transmitted by the wheat curl mite. And infected plants show yellow streaks that are parallel to the leaf veins. And depending on when the infection happens, diseased plants can become sterile, and one study found that they yielded about 78% less than healthy plants. So depending on when it gets infected, it can be absolutely devastating. These mites survive primarily on winter and spring wheat, but also on some other grassy host crops and weeds. The mites are spread by wind or leaf rubbing, and insecticides do not control their spread. The good news, though, is that the mites cannot survive more than 7 to 10 days without a host crop. So if you break the green bridge by controlling your volunteer crop and grassy weeds about 10 to 14 days before you sow your winter wheat, the risk of this is severely reduced. So while spring wheat stubble may look like an intriguing option, I personally would not risk it, and I'd choose an alternative stubble, or at least take really good precautions before sowing. Next is seeding date, and the ideal seeding window is around the last week of August until about September 15th. MASC coverage actually starts on August 15th and runs for 6 weeks until September 25th for full coverage and September 30th for reduced coverage. Earlier seedings usually just mean you get a bigger plant with more reserves in the crown to go grow back from the next spring. For seed depth, I usually aim for 3/4 of an inch to an inch deep as being ideal. I've actually noticed in the last couple of years, especially if you get a dry fall, that there's a lot of deeper seedings where producers are trying to chase moisture. But this is actually a little counterintuitive, and it just makes the plant take longer to reach the surface, resulting in a smaller crown to regrow from and less root reserves as well. So the last couple of years, we've had some very long, warm, wide open falls, and we've been able to get away with a deeper seeding, but I always worry that that won't be the case sometime. The reason that I always suggest shallow seeding is because wheat seeds really only need about like 3/10 to a half inch of precipitation to germinate, and we typically have some rain delays during harvest that would provide that shallow seed in dry soil enough moisture to get started. Next is seeding rate, and for that, I currently recommend aiming for about 25 plants per square foot, but anywhere from 20 to 30 plants per square foot should provide similar yields, as that table on the top right that I showed earlier shows. It's very important to know your 1,000 kernel weight, though. I was talking with a seed grower who harvested 2 different fields of cold front last year, and one had a 1,000 kernel weight of 30, and the other was a 1,000 kernel weight of 36, which actually resulted in an over 20 pound per acre seeding rate difference just for the same variety, but different size of seed. If you're seeding early, like right now, or up until probably like the first week of September with good conditions, you can probably seed on the lower side of this, as you'd expect those plants to have a better chance of surviving. But as you get later and later into the seeding window, I would recommend seeding heavier to compensate, as you expect more plants to potentially winter kill. Currently, Ducks actually just started a seeding rate trial at the diversification centers this year and should have the first year of its results back this winter. So if there's any changes to seeding rate recommendations that come from that, I will pass it on. And that seeding rate research that just started is being done in partnership with Manitoba Crop Alliance, which works very well with the research on the farm winter wheat seeding rate trial they currently have. These field scale trials have the grower's standard seeding rate, then 30 pounds an acre less and 30 pounds an acre higher. Last year, there was 5 trials that they had harvested, which had no significant differences in yield. But that being said, 4 out of 5 sites, the lowest seeding rate had the highest yield by about a bushel or 2 on average. And the lowest seeding rate was also the most profitable at all trial sites, saving about $8.50 an acre on average compared to the normal seeding rate, just from the reduced input costs of the seed. So I'm curious to see if the small plot research will line up with this and show similarly that these lower seeding rates are performing well and could save you some money on inputs and still achieve your desired yields. And if you're curious to try this out on your own farm, I'd recommend getting in touch with Jordan or Madison, whose contact info is at the bottom of this slide. Just an important consideration if you're in a bad grasshopper area and planning to sow a winter cereal this fall, there are a few options that you have to avoid having your crop negatively affected. The pictures on this slide show heavy pressure on the field edge as your grasshoppers move in from the ditches. And this field was sown very early on, I think it was about August 20th last year, into fallow ground. And even with the warm temperatures and heavy pest pressure, it had no more than about 6 rows of wheat that were affected, albeit those 6 rows were pretty much completely wiped out, as you can see come June 11th there. My favorite way to combat grasshoppers is doubling the seeding rate of your outside round, as this allows your crop to be seeded nice and early, and you can still kind of protect from the insect pressure. You could also wait to seed towards the end of the recommended seed window when your pest pressure is reduced, but that comes at a cost of winter survival and yield. Lastly, if you notice extreme damage in the seedlings like this, you could reseed those areas after a killing frost, as the grasshoppers will have significantly declined by then. Getting into weed control, winter wheat is a very competitive crop, but weed control is still necessary, as winter annual weeds like shepherd's purse, stinkweed, and cleavers can become big problems, and I probably see shepherd's purse and stinkweed in just about every winter wheat field I inspect. Personally, I like fall control best, as the pre-seed or post-emergent burn down can work wonders on any tough weeds that have already germinated. And then come springtime, a spring broadleaf pass of anything like Buctril M, MCPA, Pixaro is usually sufficient to keep the crop clean during that critical weed-free period until it's tall enough to outcompete anything that is late germinating. One question that I'm often asked about in the fall is about volunteers, as most fields are sown into canola stubble, and the average canola harvest loss of just over a bushel an acre is close to 10 times the recommended canola seeding rate. So, since post harvest fall rains are nearly guaranteed, most fields will look a bit like a volunteer canola field for a while in early October. But canola cannot handle cold temperatures well at all, as anybody who's had to reseed after a May long frost in the spring knows. So I don't see much reason to go out there and spray for these, as the plants are just going to die off on their own at the first hard frost. And then the following spring, any new canola volunteers that do germinate can fairly easily be taken care of by that broadleaf in crop pass. Same thing can be said for 2-row barley volunteers. Here are some pictures of a field from this past year where there was significant barley volunteers in the fall. And then come springtime, they were completely wiped out by the cold winter conditions. And the winter wheat was actively growing through that mat of dead plants in nice rows without any issue. PGRs like Manipulator and Modus are starting to become a lot more commonplace than they used to be. And I've seen many producers that are pushing yields, and they require shorter plants with thicker, stronger stems to help reduce lodging. The most critical thing about PGRs is the timing of them, as it basically has to be during stem elongation all the way up to early flag leaf, I guess, or just before flag leaf. But early stem elongation is best, usually around growth stages 30 to 32. Unfortunately, this means it has to be its own pass, as there's not a registered tank mix in sight. I've heard of producers trying split apps with herbicide or fertility passes, but those are all off-label. One producer did tell me that last year they didn't see any significant yield increase from their PGR application, but they were able to drive 1 to 1.5 miles per hour faster in the combine compared to in the untreated areas, and that speed at harvest time made the application worth it to them. Getting into fertility, starting with nitrogen, the best advice, in my opinion, is to get about 50% of your N down in the fall time. 100% spring nitrogen application can be both risky and difficult, as often fields are either too wet to get on them or too dry for the nitrogen that is applied to get down to the plant roots. And early nitrogen is critical for wheat, as the wheat seed head is produced by about the fifth leaf stage, which happens in early to mid-May. And any nitrogen that becomes plant available after that point in time gets put more towards protein and plant growth more than yield. P and K are both important, as winter cereals make 2 seedlings in cold ground, and those nutrients are both immobile and less available in cold soils. I've noticed in lighter sandy land, it's important to watch your copper levels, as sometimes you can see pigtailing of the leaves, and that means that a micronutrient application could be warranted. And beating the same drum, I'm sure everyone says, but soil tests so that you know what you've got available. You can save a little bit of money on fertilizer potentially, and you can catch a deficiency before it becomes a train wreck. So Ducks recently wrapped up a 3-year nitrogen fertility trial that just finished last year, and I'd like to quickly touch on here. It had 7 different nitrogen fertility treatments as high as 180 kilograms per hectare, which is actually 161 pounds per acre. And all of these treatments were split applied, where 50% was applied in the fall as urea and ESN mid-row banded at seeding, and the other 50% was spring broadcast urea with agrotane. There was also one 120 kilogram per hectare treatment that was just 100% spring applied urea with agrotane. Overall, after the 11 site years were combined, the split 150, which is 135 pounds per acre, was consistently the highest yielding treatment, but it was statistically no different than the split 120, split 180 or spring 120. So once you applied up to that 120, which is about 107 pounds of applied N, you'd pretty much reach your max yield or very close to it. And the 100% spring applied treatment performed just as well as the split applied treatments did, with its average yield being just about a little over a bushel an acre less than the split treatment of the same. From that data, I did a quick little economic analysis from grain and urea prices back in February of this past year. At the time, it was $8 a bushel for the sell price, and then 80 cents per pound of added nitrogen, which would be about 110 bucks per ton of urea. When putting that against all the fertility treatments, the split 120 treatment had the highest increased gross income, followed by the spring 120 and the split 150 treatments. What was most interesting to me in this was that the highest nitrogen treatment, the split 180, was actually the lowest return on investment other than the check, as the extra N just didn't provide enough extra yield to actually offset the added costs. And one thing that wasn't included in this calculation is the fact that oftentimes fall nitrogen is a fair bit cheaper than your spring nitrogen, so you can potentially save some additional dollars there while also guaranteeing product availability and beating the spring rush at your local agro retailer at the same time. And briefly, just before wrapping up, I wanted to touch on another ongoing trial, our nitrous oxide emissions trial, which compares 100% fall banded untreated urea to a split fall and spring application with an inhibitor. The graph below shows your nitrous oxide flux on the y-axis and then the date on the x-axis, and this was for Melita last year. You can see that the biggest spike happens during the spring thaw, and then the other smaller spikes are from rainfall events. For Melita, the 100% fall urea treatment was by far the highest emitter, and the 60% fall urea and 40% spring urea with agrotane was the lowest emitter of all of the other applied N treatments. Kind of conversely, at Roblin last year, the lowest emitter of the applied N treatments was actually Super U that got floated on in the late fall just before freeze up. And that was great to see because I know that that's a growing practice. But sadly, the Super U was the only applied N treatment that was actually significantly lower yielding than the others. So there's still a little bit more work to figure out what was going on there. But long story short, whenever possible, please use an inhibitor. And shamelessly, just before I wrap up, I will plug the Ducks Unlimited Winter Wheat program that I run, which pays 20 bucks an acre up to a maximum of 250 acres and provides agronomic advice from seeding through to harvest. Sadly, due to increased interest this year, I'm already full for the year, but if you are interested in this, I can put you on a wait list and start preparing for potentially next fall even too. Below is the link to our website, and if you want more information, the QR code at the bottom could be scanned and you can contact me for that. And that was everything that I had. So, Lionel, if you had any questions or anything, I could take those now.
Okay, yeah, good presentation, Alex. Yeah, there's been a couple questions. The first one, I guess, was when you put up your slide about a couple slides about protein levels, and the question was, what is a good protein level, and how high have you seen them, and do you get paid extra for higher protein?
I guess I'll work my way backwards on that question. Sadly, you don't get paid extra for higher protein. unless you're in one of those situations where you can sell your high protein winter wheat as a spring wheat. But yeah, the level at a elevator, it just needs to meet 11% protein. And actually, when we did that fertility trial, even the check was meeting the 11% protein. So usually it's a pretty easy bar to clear. But I'd say any good protein for winter wheat would be getting above 12.5 or into the 13% range.
Okay. Seeding rates. How high are producers going? I guess you mentioned two there, but I guess it depends on thousand kernel weight, but how high are you seeing producers seeds winter wheat?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of people. Well, actually, in the trial that we have started for seeding right there, the highest treatment I believe is 39 plants per square foot. But I have personally seen people go like about 150 pounds per acre, which would be kind of in the 2.5 bushel per acre range if your bushel weights were close to 60. So, yeah, kind of in that 2.25 to 2.5 would be on the high end that I've seen.
Okay. Seeding deadlines. How late have you seen winter wheat put in and still make it?
I have seen winter wheat sown the first week of October and still make it. Although by far, like your best chance of having a really good crop, anyways, would be that first week of August, or sorry, last week of August, first 2 weeks of September. Although I have seen fields that were September 21st to September 25th that ended up being high yielding fields. So kind of in and around that range where you're still in the 100% coverage by MASC is where I would hope to be getting it in by.
Are you correlating seeding rate trials to soil texture, example, sands versus clays?
No, I'm not actually. That would be an interesting thing to do, but no, I haven't done anything of that myself personally.
Okay. Oh, you mentioned about seeding barley into barley, and the question came up about chaff rows. Any issues with chaff rows in the following year?
Not much that I've seen. Maybe in the very early spring, you can kind of see where it's maybe held up a day or two, sort of thing, just working its way through that. But honestly, I've seen winter wheat sown into. This was one time actually. It was into a sweet clover that was crimper rolled, so it had like full 100% ground cover, and the winter wheat still grew up through those rows. So unless you've actually got like a big pile and the mat is like I don't know, say 6 inches or a foot deep, I don't really think that you'll ever run into any issues with that. And to be honest, I think I've probably seen more troubles from that in pea stubble, where there's actually some piles of the viney plant mass than I have in any of the cereal stubbles.
Okay, and okay, this one here, yeah. Um, the if it doesn't emerge in the fall, what are its chances of making it in the spring?
I'd say they'd be definitely a bit lower, but it's not out of the question. I've seen fields where, as long as the seed gets to that cold temperature where it can vernalize and actually produce seed, if the seed itself can survive the winter and then come up nice, then it'll still be able to provide a crop. But for the most part, you really want to be getting to that 2 to 3 leaf, maybe even a tiller stage in the fall time. And ideally, that will give you the best results as far as yield and winter survival, too.
In my experience, would that make it later the following year, or have you seen that?
I have, yeah, and usually it'll end up being harvested like well after your spring wheats or anything would be probably by a good week, I'd say on average. And yeah, you can even see it in some of the fields where, say, there was like a big healthy crown in one field, and then the next field you looked at it only got to say 1 or 2 leaf going into the fall. Even those ones will probably have a delay in harvest.
Okay. Are you going to be able to hang on with us, Alex, in case there's some other ones that come in?
Yeah, for sure. Nope, I can be here till the webinar is done.
Okay, great. I'm going to grab the screen here. And one question that I'm going to bring up is the question came in regarding sowing into pea stubble and your any concerns about pea stubble. You kind of mentioned some of them, but I think you maybe started to talk about it at the end here where uh, working through the vines and causing piles. Is that something producers should be concerned about?
Uh, Depends on how many piles I guess you have in the field. If it's fairly well spread out as best you can with those chaff piles, then it should work out okay. I've actually probably seen peas be one of the like most I guess like highest growth or most new fields that are being seeded. Like there's always three or four or half a dozen that I'm seeing that are in pea stubble just because it's off so early that it looks like an enticing field to be seeded into. And if you're seeding very early, like that up to the first or second week of September, I've actually seen it work out very well. But I would really caution that it would be ideal to do that as you go further north in the province too, where you're kind of at a higher chance of getting good snow cover, and you will always kind of have that blanket of insulating layer versus if you get further south in the province and we have those warm spells in January or February, and then it gets cold again. That can be really tough when you've got nothing to really catch the snow and keep it on those rows.
Any management practices ahead of time before you seed on pea stubble compared to canola? You go straight in or whatever basically, and would you do anything different on pea stubble?
Not really, unless you had like an area that had so many of those piles that maybe you'd harrow just like that spot of the field to try and spread it out as best you can. But no, for the most part, the management of it pre-seed would be about the same.
Okay, and I think you're on today. Any experience in your work with winter wheat into pea stubble?
Yeah, I would just, I think Alex covered it well. My big concern would just be not having as much snow trapping ability. So, just like Alex said, if you're more confident in the amount of snow that you're going to get, it would probably be okay. But if not, I would try to steer clear away from pea stubble.
Okay, good. Thanks, you guys. Okay, crop scouting panel. And guess what? We're going to stay in through winter wheat. The question I got from a producer was regarding piebald and how he can better manage his fertilizer application to avoid it, and also maybe a little bit as to what causes it and why it's there. And I sent this question to Marla, and they'll see Alex after Marla answers if you have any input to this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lionel. So piebald is something that will show up usually when there's inadequate nitrogen during grain fill. And so at this point, obviously can't do anything about it, but it is a kind of a good check-in to see what may have gone wrong. So going in and doing some fall soil testing might be able to see, if you've got residual nitrogen. Guessing there won't be a whole lot if there was a short of nitrogen during that filling period. But it's a good check-in to be able to sit back and look at, what had happened and what might need to be adjusted into the future. So is it that it was just a higher yield potential than was fertilized for? Was there high amounts of nitrogen losses earlier in the season? And, do you need to be looking at using a protected product in order to decrease those losses? So unfortunately, it's more something where you just have to kind of take stock of what happened, get that soil test done to double check that you do have very depleted soil test nitrogen so that you know that it's just something ran out along the way, and then looking back to figure out what might have gone wrong for future years.
So the white, from what I've hear guys at probably at the elevator say about a soft kernel and a hard kernel, and the piebald is a softer kernel. Is that right?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's like a starchy kind of buildup, or you have more of that starch in it, and so that kernel, there's not going to be kind of that hard kernel condition that you'd be looking for, or you're also going to have low protein in that as well. But Alex or Anne could probably speak more to that than me as a soils person.
Okay. Any comments, Alex?
No, actually, I think that was pretty well covered. I think the only thing that I might mention is a couple of times when I've run into this issue myself, it was actually a field that looked really, really lush and good, and it ended up just being a very late spring application, like let's say after May long kind of thing, where a lot of the seed or nitrogen that was there didn't really end up going into the seed. It kind of ended up going into the leaves and the plants. So you had this beautiful lush green crop that didn't really yield like it should have. So that can also be a potential issue, is it was lower in fertility, but just not at the right timing, I guess.
Would it be more common in a all fall applied nitrogen than a split applied?
I would say only if the all fall had such a heavy snow load and a very wet spring to cause any leaching. Otherwise, I would say I've probably seen it more in the all spring ones that are applied later than you'd anticipate just due to wet weather or any conditions like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd add to that too, Alex, on the like the losses in general. When you know you've got a high potential for loss and getting in too late. Anne and I were covering this. Anne had a demonstration at Crop Diagnostic School this year about timing, essentially rates and timing for winter wheat and fall rye. And we did an application with a protected product in the spring. And not only did the late spring kind of just not take up the product as quickly, but also if you're adding, say, a protected product, if you're broadcasting on, recognize that that protection actually delays release. So it's another thing to think about that could actually cause potential issues if you're going in with like a protected urea.
No, very good point. Yeah.
So what is kind of the spring date for making sure? I know staging is important, but kind of is there a date you guys have in mind that's kind of this needs to be done by then?
If I would probably say I'd like to see it done before about May 15th if I had to put a day on it. Of course, if you get like a really, really warm spring and everything just starts jumping, you'd probably want that done even sooner. But ideally, if you're like applying your urea broadcast or UAN, I guess floated on in that first week of May or in that last week of April, you should be in pretty good condition for it to actually get to the plant at the right time.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Next question going out to, I guess this would be for Kim. Our canola fields are dirty, again, looking dirty this year. And as the season goes on, they seem to be getting worse. Question is, should I spray or should I swath? And then if I spray, how long will it take to dry down? And any advice on making my spray work better?
Okay, thanks, Lionel. Yeah, there's a lot of dirty fields out there this year, and I guess good government answer is it depends on what your goals are, what you want to do. How a big thing is what are the weeds and how bad are they? Swathing versus spraying. A lot of times that just depends on weed density and the type of weeds that are there. Something like if it's lots of lamb's quarters, then they tend to dry down quite nicely when they're swathed, and that can be a pretty quick way to get those dried down. Those big green patches of kochia, those take forever. When you've swathed them, they just don't seem to dry down very fast. If you are going to be spraying, then you need to look at the products you're using. If you're using just a straight Roundup, that's not going to work on weeds like kochia because we know that most of our kochia is Roundup resistant or glyphosate resistant. So you're going to have to throw in another product like AIM or Heat. And when you're doing any desiccation, if you're actually going to truly desiccate, then to get rid of those really green weeds and use a product like Reglone, then water volume is just a huge part of that, and making sure you get really, really good coverage. So using as much water as possible, really watching the temperatures and watching the days. If you're going to be using Heat or AIM, then we want to have these nice sunny days that you're putting it on. This weather for the next week looks really great for putting any product on. And if you're going to be doing Reglone, you actually don't want it. You don't want to be putting it on in the bright sunlight. You actually would be putting it on a bit later in the day. Hopefully a bit, we could get a day where it was a bit cooler, cloudy, a bit overcast. You don't want that bright sunlight when you're actually applying it because it kind of works too fast if you do it that way. But then if the next day is nice and sunny, then you get really, really good results with Reglone or some of the other Dicot products. Make sure you're watching again your water volumes. Make sure you're paying attention to your adjuvants. Put in the appropriate adjuvant at the appropriate amount. And again, just tons and tons of water and get good coverage if you're going to be using these products. Timing wise, basically, like if you're looking at the glyphosate products, then a lot of guys are saying yes, 7 to 10 days. That's really optimistic. Realistically, those products can take up to 3 weeks depending on the weather, but we are early in the season. We've got great weather, so they will take significantly shorter amount of time than that. And then as you start adding in the heat and the aim to that, the glyphosate, that'll work quicker. And then the Reglone products work the quickest of all. The Dicot products will work the very quickest. So you have to be able to time your harvest and be able to get in there with the combines at the right time. But it really depends on which weeds you're going after and the density and that type of thing. But either swathing or spraying can work. It's just got to be you just have to be realistic about the timeline on how fast it's going to work.
Will Reglone kill the lamb's quarters or just dry down the top growth?
Well, Reglone really just dries down that top growth. I mean, those are contact herbicides, so they don't Reglone and the same as heat and aim. They don't, they don't really. They work by contact, and so they don't get into the plant and kill from within. But when you're using a product like Reglone, you really just want to dry down so that you can get in there and harvest, and your crop needs to be ready to go. Like you need to be at like 90% dry down already on the crop because it stops the growth immediately. It stops any further growth and it dries down quite quickly. And if you get really good conditions for Reglone, and you put it on at the right time and you get a good day the day after, it can work really, really well. But you've got to have the water volume on that one too, whether you're putting it on by air or by ground rig, you still have to have the appropriate water volume for that. But we've seen it just work phenomenally in some of the pea crops this year that got desiccated. It just works so nicely. And again, we are early enough in the season that it will still work really well. We start running into trouble with some of these products if we're like, if we were a month from now trying to dry down some crops, and with some cooler, kind of damp weather ahead of us, then they don't dry down very well. But with the weather that we've got forecasted, I would think that you'll still get really good results with any of those products.
Okay, good, Kim. I was talking to the producer yesterday, and they were starting to question didn't use enough water. So I'm glad you brought up that point about water volumes. They used burn off on for their wheat, and they went with 5 gallons, and they're wishing they had went with more now. Next question for both Kim and Marla. Areas in the field like this that you cut around because they're kochia mixed with wheat right now. How should I manage them this fall for my best management practice?
Well, I'll start on the wheat end of things, and then I would hope that Marla can chime in on the salinity aspect of this because we see a lot of the kochia and not in this picture, but lots of times you'll see foxtail barley in there as well, which are indicators that that there's some salinity in that area. I would ideally like to cut the kochia as soon as possible. I wouldn't want to wait any longer. Most annual weeds by now have set viable seed, so if the seed is there, if you cut them and that seed ends up falling out of the plant and onto the ground, it's viable, it's in the seed bank, and it'll probably grow at some point in the future. Kochia, the seed is starting to become viable now. So the earlier you cut it, the better. You still have a chance of cutting down on some of that seed set. So I would cut that as soon as possible. If you can't get it done until later, sometimes, we just don't have time to do that right now. We go around those patches and come back to them later. And so if you do that, again, cutting it down, mowing it, whatever you do, like it's really tough on some of these patches because there's that patch that's mostly kochia, but and not a lot of wheat in there. It's just hard to know when do you when it's kind of got more wheat in the patch. It's a little harder to decide whether to leave the patch or not, or try to combine through some of it. But those big patches, I would get them cut as soon as I can. After that, mow them down, burn them, bale them off if they can make good feed. If anybody has a use for that. I'm not a fan of tilling those spots later on, and I just because of salinity issue, and I was hoping maybe Marla could put in, use her wisdom and give us some advice on what to do with some of these saline patches in the field where we do see these big kochia and sometimes foxtail barley patches.
Yeah, so I mean, thanks, Kim, for commenting on the weed management side, because that is not my area, other than recognizing which ones are the saline ones. And ultimately, what this is telling you is that you've got a problem, and it's going to be a long-term management to try to rectify it. So, unfortunately, when it comes to salinity, if you've got salinity patches where crops aren't growing very well, but your kochia and foxtail barley are taking over, then that means that you need to do something to increase water infiltration through that area and decrease the water table, essentially, to pull that away from the surface. And so in annual crop situations, we tend to see these get worse because we just don't take up as much water in an annual crop situation as we would in a perennial. If you're dealing with patches like this that are along roadsides, then maybe having some kind of alfalfa, 15 feet, 10, 15, 20, whatever feet width along the edge of the ditch, essentially right on the field edge, can help to decrease some of that saline creep where the water is pushing in sort of underground from where that ditch is. So that can help to manage it and get rid of that saline creep or that roadside salinity in the future. But again, it's a long-term kind of process for that to happen. And what we need is more rainfall in order to move that salt back down through that soil profile and away from the root zone. So unfortunately, we see these things, we see them as bad in the moment. When we need to start managing them and trying to get something growing is when we have more moisture to help that crop get going, whether it's the perennial, whether it's, whatever our solution is. And often we don't think about putting the solution in place in a year like this when this is looking so bad, because when it's getting better, we think that the problem's going away. And so then we don't really worry about it at that time, but that's actually when we need to manage for when it's going to get worse again. As Kim mentioned, mowing down or taking this down earlier, that kochia is actually a good plan. And it can make for good feed if you have somebody around you or you yourself need feed. But again, mowing it down earlier. So recognizing if, worst case scenario, if you can't do anything else, mow these patches out early, keep them mowed, keep them down, keep them vegetative. They take up more water if they're growing that way rather than if they're trying to reproduce and set seed. So keeping that in mind. And then ultimately, like Kim said, don't till it because tillage is the worst thing you can do to draw more water up. So it's just going to make the problem worse if we till them later on.
Okay, good. Thanks, Marla and Kim. Gonna spend a few slides. Well, there is one more question I'm just gonna go to here. I want to get it addressed before we go too much farther. Somebody had to ask the question regarding avian control for bird repellent and has received emergency registration, and somebody was wanting to know some more information about it. Kim, you're on. I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you know anything much about the new product that just got emergency registration?
I don't know a lot. I know we do have a write-up on it in our last crop pest report. So if anybody wants to go online and find that, or some of you are getting our report regularly, but our last one was last Thursday. And so it's a new product, and we're looking to get some feedback on it too. It's an emergency registration, which means it may not be a full registration going forward. It'll be evaluated. And basically, it's to control blackbirds. So it's the only product out there. There's never been a product like this before. So we're looking for guys that are going to be using it, looking for feedback on it. And it's something that that we need to evaluate going forward. But it is a brand new product, and if it works, it would be a great tool to have, because we know that blackbirds can cause lots of issues.
So it must be some kind of deterrent, I guess, eh?
Yeah, I really don't know even what the product is. I was it was emergency registration, and quite recently too, like very recently. So it's not something that I know anything about. Like I said, it's brand new to all of us.
Okay, good. Well,
Lionel, I can
yeah,
probably say a few more words
okay,
about it if you want.
you bet,
Um,
John.
so yeah, so the product is called methyl anthranilate. That's the active ingredient. The brand name, of course, Avian Control. It's a bird repellent. It's not a control. It doesn't kill blackbirds. It's a repellent. So that's the way it works. Um, we're still looking for more information on this product. So if anyone does use this product, we'd be really interested to know how effective it was. Was coverage an issue? You need to do it with aerial, obviously, in sunflowers, and whether there was any challenges or crop injury issues. Um, on the one of the things on the label that's worth noting is that it's recommended just to do a small groups of plants at first and observe things for 5 to 7 days before you do a much bigger area, just in case there is any potential damage to plants.
Okay, good. Thanks, John and Kim, for getting some of that information out, and hopefully as we go on through the season here, we'll get some more information from people that have tried it. So good, thank you. Maybe for the amount of time here that's left, I'll maybe just show one more slide here, and that'd be this one here regarding where we are in harvest right now. So as a province, we're at 10%. Winter wheat, fall rye pretty much complete. Spring wheat anywhere from 18 to 20% between the cereal crops. Field peas getting close to being 3/4 done. And I think after this coming week of good weather, I think we're going to see a large amount of acres coming off, and we'll be able to give even some better estimations of yield. So that's the big slide, I guess, for where we are and where we've come from last week. Nothing too else major. We've talked a bit about some of these. Wanted to mention that there's going to be on September 9th, it's starting 9th through the 18th, special crop disease information days. They'll be on sunflowers, and maybe we'll learn more about avian there. We'll also have corn and flax in those ones as well. So there's the dates and locations. So if you're interested in attending, make sure you keep aware of those ones or call one of your production extension specialists, and they'll be able to give you the information. There's our names and contacts and locations. So if you got any questions, definitely give us a call. Our livestock people, and there's been a new program announced. It's a BMP for areas that are short on water. It's again, I don't have all the details on that one, but if you are in an area that is short for water right now, and you're having to supplement water on pasture, or you're running out of even pasture water for winter, contact any one of the livestock and forage people, and they'll be able to give you more information and as to how to get an application in for some funding for getting some new water systems. Manitoba hay listing, again, if you got hay or you're looking to buy hay, that's up and running. So put your information on there. Crop residue burning program has started. So if you're in an area, or make sure if you're looking at burning, make sure you're checking to make sure it's a burning day. Or if you're in an area that requires a permit, make sure that you are now getting them before you go ahead and do it. Our MASC offices throughout the province and their numbers, and my information, and Lori. And I'd like to thank Aaron for being on today, and join us next week, September the 3rd. So we're getting into fall, I guess. So join us next week, September 3rd, for our next edition of Crop Talk. Thanks to the presenters, and thanks for the questions.